Welcome back to the Customer Discovercast. This is Ethan Halfide, your host. This episode is brought to you by CustomerDiscovery.co, helping early stage founders build products that people love. I'm here with Vikas, who is co-founder and CEO of Offsight, who is basically project management software that is catering to the disruptive modular and offsite construction industry. Welcome, Vikas.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for having me.
How are you? For the people that don't know who you are, talk about basically how you got started with the offsite industry, a little bit about yourself and up to when you started the company. That's all we need for now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm an engineer. That's my background. I went to school as an engineer, systems engineer. Both myself and my colleague, who are also the co-founder of this company, we're both engineers, actually. Our background, in fact, is in essentially launching enterprise products. We've been part of other companies, launched products, scaled, iterated, and so forth. That's our traditional background. And how did we get started here? How did we end up here? It's a long story. It's been a bit of a journey. So, we started off with another company that was in relatively a different space, but building a product that essentially would become the product that we end up using today at Offsight. You're building a product for some other type of solution or some other type of problem, and you end up finding out that there's one that's even better. And that's kind of how we ended up here. But the story is kind of pretty interesting. A couple of years back, we kind of started off experimenting and trying to build a product around tracking people, equipment, other sorts of variables in an industrial or factory-based setting. And one of our early investors essentially introduced us to an interesting customer that was in the construction world, building prefab, pre-assembled electrical products. And that was our first foray ever in this type of direction. Still not even close to where we are today, but getting there. And what we ended up doing is we built an MVP with that customer around a very simple product that let them track the status of their assembled electrical equipment as it went through production on a factory floor. And we also built a mobile app for people on the floor to essentially track that and confirm that they've assembled everything correctly, done all the quality correctly before they ship these products off to the many different job sites or construction sites where they would end up. And that's kind of how version 1.0 of this product started many years ago. But it wasn't until obviously much more recently, in fact, just last year, that we really reached a point where we got production ready after landing a very big customer and working with that customer to essentially build a tool internally that let us take any sort of project manufacturing or production process and build into a digital workflow in our app. And at that point, we also had a very interesting learning from working with that customer, not just the fact that we had a product that many years later is ready to sell to a market, but also kind of where that market is. We'd been experimenting all over the place with different companies. And working with this interesting customer, we realized that there's a lot of demand and a lot of interesting stuff happening in the offsite construction and modular construction world. There's a big disruption underway. There's a new process of construction that's essentially changing the way all sorts of buildings, commercial buildings, residential buildings, all sorts of buildings are going to be built. And as we had the grasp of the market from the customer, we realized, hey, this is probably the right place for our product. And we started verticalizing, started focusing on that customer group, and shut down our old business, started Offsight, and hit the ground running. So that's the story of us.
Very well said. And, I have a ton of questions about how you guys shifted, made that transition, because it probably wasn't easy, right? You're kind of operating two businesses at the same time for a little bit, it sounds like. But first, to educate the listeners, what is modular and offsite construction? We've spoke about it. I know what it is. Your background explains it well, but for those that can't kind of connect the dots, what is it?
Absolutely. So modular and offsite construction is an interesting concept. What it really means is you're taking construction work offsite. By offsite, we mean into the factory. Instead of having a custom construction project where all the work gets done at an open job site, you may have all sorts of what are called subcontractors, people who specialize in electrical work, mechanical, plumbing, wall fixtures. They'll all come to, in a traditional construction way, in a traditional construction method, come to an open job site there and do all the work there. It's a hodgepodge of work, people coming in and out. Materials are wasted. There's lots of inefficiencies, lots of lack of productivity all over the place. But in the offsite setting, what offsite's all about is essentially you take that big project, let's say like a multifamily 4 or 5 story apartment project, residential project, and you bring it into a factory. What does that mean? You build products or components that eventually will end up on that one job site, and they'll be connected there in the job site, and completed. And what are these components? They look almost like in this image behind me. They're modules. A good example of these are modules, and they're essentially fully assembled apartment units, like essentially a fully assembled room with mechanical, plumbing, wall fixtures, lighting, the kitchen. You can have all elements in there, and it really ships in like a block, almost like a Lego block. Those blocks are stacked, the plumbing is connected, the joints are connected on site, and literally the project is completed in a fraction of the time. You're leveraging the benefits of a factory assembly process to build these components, and then the quick turnaround on the actual job site of connecting them. And you can complete that same project in half the time by going offsite and at 30% less cost. So, that's
30%.
another
Wow.
30%, savings on the entire project. So that's essentially what offsite construction is all about. It's a disruptive move to moving this work into the factory, moving it offsite, getting the benefits of factory production in the construction world. So
Awesome.
that's the idea.
Now let's speak about how you identified this trend. So was it as obvious as you started to notice, just from walking around your city, and you started to notice construction was being done a lot differently, and you started to see kind of these, I call them coding blocks. Like if you're learning how to code like a software developer, you kind of insert different function blocks and stuff like that. But for you, how did you identify the trend of modular and offsite construction?
That's a good question. So the customer we were working with essentially built 4 or 5 types of electrical products, modularized electrical products for modular data center projects. So essentially these offsite type projects in the data center construction world. And working with them, we kind of got an understanding that, hey, this is an interesting trend. Their owners, the people who are building these data centers, are sourcing all these products offsite, sourcing them from the factory, sourcing them prefab. And prefab has been around for a while, but what's really interesting today is there's like a much more dramatic macro shift towards building all types of commercial products offsite. You typically only had people build mobile homes or single family homes and products like that offsite. Now it's just capturing the whole breadth and depth of the construction world, from big skyscrapers to, as I mentioned, multifamily residential projects to healthcare projects, and kind of understanding that this was happening across the construction world, having that aha moment, that actually just came from a lot of like learning and just research too, to be honest. Like, we realized this product could have a fit for this type of process, but then it was more figuring out who are the people responsible for this process, who are the factories that are actually building these type of products. That actually came from a lot of online research. So as we started to gain a foothold, we started looking online, figured out which projects were of this kind, who was doing them, who were the big players in this space, and then just ingrained ourselves into the community over the whole course of the year, just building up our brand, getting the first few customers in the space, and then from those customers leveraging their name to get more customers and so forth. So I would say it was a gradual learning and iteration process to kind of figure out how this market was moving and kind of to put ourselves right in the middle of it, so to speak.
Absolutely. And it seems like you guys did that seamlessly. I'm sure you would probably disagree because I wasn't there. You weren't. So you knew like kind of the trials and tribulations of that all. And that's my biggest question. So did you mention you have 2 co-founders, not just one, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Well, actually, no, sorry, myself and my one company. Yep, that's right. So 2 of us total.
So 2 total. Okay. And you guys are both engineers. So what I want to know is the division of tasks is a very difficult job to do when you don't have a clearly differential like skill set, because it seems like both of you guys are engineers, right? How do you guys decide on who's going to do what, right?
It's a good question. So at first we were both doing both of it. We were both doing everything. So you could say like, I did a lot of things. He did some stuff on product. He did sales. I did sales too. I also did some stuff on product. Like there was a lot of overlap in the beginning. But then as, you start to grow as a business, you start to get customers, there's a need to like scale your business. And what I mean by that is there's a need to get capital. There's a need to raise financing. There's a need to hire people. And in order to do that, you've got to define your roles. You got to kind of split apart your responsibilities. And at that point, it kind of became clear, just from my background and so forth, that I would probably be a good fit for the fundraising aspect of things, for, going and championing the business, getting financing from all sorts of investors, seed, angels, et cetera. And then also it kind of became clear that, his background and his fit was more with customer outreach and sales and customer onboarding and so forth. And allowing us to separate those roles let us do double the work, because basically as I'm fundraising and we're progressing in that fashion, he's also closing customers and the business is growing. So it is important to eventually reach that point where you separate and define roles. And some of it comes from trial and error because people's skill sets are different. And in the early stages, maybe you're both good at the same things, but as the business starts to grow, it becomes clear that one person's probably better at doing one than the other, and you want to let that person
Ah.
continue to do that. So
Wow. Yeah,
that's
that was really
that's
well
what.
said. That's such an ambiguous space. A lot of people don't understand how, to divide tasks, right? And, it could be
Mhm.
a tricky subject. I've heard countless stories from guests and friends as well that, the reason why their business went under was because someone was fighting over the CEO position rather than the COO or CTO position. And that kind of brings me to our next phase. Like after you reach a division of tasks, clearly defined roles, how many customers or, how much traction did you have before you were successfully raising funding?
It's a good question. So for us, we had the interesting situation of having a product before, right? So we had spent a lot of time really building this product out over the many years before we started Offsight. So we had like a production type of product ready to go. We custom use and it matured over many years, so it had a lot of functionality that customers wanted. So when we started raising, we actually already had some customers because we had used this product to close our first few customers, and they were using it. We were getting momentum, we were getting user growth, we were getting engagement growth. We still are, but that already started off essentially at that point. So that was essentially the point at which we said, all right, it's time to start raising our initial financing, to start hiring, on the engineering side first, and then now we're hiring on other fronts too. I mean, go to market, sales, marketing, etc. But we started off engineering first, hiring on engineering first, and at that point it made total sense. It also kind of the business drove itself because you're getting more customers, because you're getting more growth, you're getting more usage. You need to build out your product. You're reaching levels of scalability. You need more engineers. The problem essentially is like a wheel; it compounds on itself. So you realize that all things aligned and make sense, right? And we've kind of done that to this point and continue to do that to the point. So we're at a stage now where we have so many customers and enough engagement, enough growth, where the engineering problem is going to continue to be a problem. You're going to continue to actually still hire engineers and continue to scale. That's always going to be a thing. But we're also at the stage now where it makes logical sense to start building on our go-to-market and start entering other markets now that we have such a strong customer base, community, defined case studies, all the material we need to scale to other geographies and other areas too. So I think that's kind of how we let the business define our decision to fundraise in a way.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. So, when you started out and, you're trying to get your first customers, right? And this is something that I've seen 500 startups touch on a lot. YC touches on a little bit, but 500 startups has a really big focus on this. Even in comparison to Techstars, enterprise sales for startups. That's essentially what you guys have to do. How did you guys do that
Yep.
with your first 5 customers?
It's a good question. So some of the first customers we actually just met, and it's not an easy thing for sure. But some of the first customers we met at events. So before this was like before the lockdown started, in fact, of last year, 2020. So right, we were fortunate enough to meet them like right at the beginning,
Wow.
2020. And that yeah, it worked. It was interesting. Yeah. And just being able to meet them face to face there at an event, tell them a little bit about our product, how it fits the need. And this was an event on Modular and Offsight, so you knew that the people
Right.
attending like had similar interest. Obviously, could be a fit for your product, right? So meeting them there, and after that, shortly thereafter, they wanted a live demo of the product. They wanted to see it in person, confirm that it would fit their need. There were a couple in-person meetings there before the whole lockdown started, obviously. And then after that point, they said, "All right, we'd be interested in using your software." And we set them up relatively a couple of weeks after taking their physical process, building the digital workflow or an app, and then letting them download the apps, launch their account so they can download the apps from the mobile site. So that process of getting the first few customers, there are many routes, but I would say the ones that have worked out for us, the original stage would have been in person, but then also LinkedIn. Even after the lockdown happened, we continue to use LinkedIn as a means to go directly to these customers. Send them targeted messages that have to do with their process. Like, this is a tool for your factory. We're looking up the right people, right, who are project managers and other production people at the factory level, so we know they're the right fit for our product. They're the right decision makers. And then we provide them a tailored message in terms of like why this product fits your need, but then also throw in there some customers we're working with. As you get more customers, that becomes easier, because obviously they know other people in the space. They recognize those names. They realize that if you're working with them, then they must be a fit too. And that's kind of snowballs on itself. So, when you start off, it's going to be hard because you don't have all those customers to reference. So you may need to kind of, hope that one person will kind of take a little bit of a chance on you, or kind of, be your guinea pig, so to speak. But once you get a couple of those customers under the belt, that process just snowballs. You can start referencing them, and always ask your customers if they're happy in using your product for testimonials, for content, because that's also going to help you with that outreach. You can add that content to that LinkedIn message and say, hey, this is how XYZ customers using it. Check out our case study. And that's going to definitely open doors for you. So I would say that's the process from beginning to where we are now. But in the beginning, it is a lot of just, going to events and other methods of just, trying to get that first customer to be willing to take a chance on you, so to speak.
That's powerful, man. Yeah. And then you can leverage that traction. It ultimately led to a successful raise, right? Talk about that. You were in charge of fundraising.
Right. That's right.
What was the most difficult part about that fundraising?
It's a good question. I would say that for us, the main thing for us is that what a learning that we had when we started Offsight, from the beginning to where we are today, is, like I said earlier, just we kind of let the business guide the fundraising. So what did I mean by that? It means that, like, as you're seeing success on the business front, fundraising becomes easier because, you have a good story to tell, where you're going, how this is going to become a big business. You've removed like layers of the onion, right? The things that you're not sure about become clear, right? Who are you selling to? That becomes clear. Who, have they scaled with you? Absolutely. They've moved to many factory sites. They're using us. Do you have strong retention? Of course. Users have increased. Does your product fit a need? Absolutely. Engagement's up, right? So it's clear that they need this product and they're using it daily. So there are a lot of the elements that you would be required for a strong fundraise questions people would ask kind of get removed, right? So as the business starts to grow, then fundraising can kind of grow in parallel with it, right? And you don't want to, you can always, fundraise before you even have a product or even before you even start a business. A lot of people do it, but I think it becomes easier and it becomes less of you could say an emotional type of pitch and more of like a logical type of pitch as you start to see attraction. You're still selling the vision, you're still selling the goal of becoming a big business, and that's always going to be there. The market's going to be disruptive. It's a unique opportunity. We want to be at the center of this. Those elements kind of are always there, but I think the more logical things around like how does this business actually scale, do customers need this product, is it clear that they would scale with it, like you can grow in these customers, like all those things start to become more certain and the fundraising becomes easier. So my answer to that is pretty much like we let, as I said, the business control the fundraising, and as we knew we needed more capital because we were growing, that pitch just became easier and that story just became easier to tell. So that's kind of how it all came together.
That's awesome. Yeah. And, how did you decide on how much to raise and how much to give? Because that's not always easy, right? How much you're going to give away from your hard-earned company to someone who's literally writing you a check, So it has to be worthwhile. It has to help you do some sort of meaningful goal or milestone, basically. How did you decide on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, once again, to kind of go back to what I was saying before, like a little bit, and this is kind of in the same context, like you're letting the business drive that decision. So it's essentially, you need X amount of capital to reach the next step, right? So, you need, several millions to hire people, to scale, you already hired engineering. Now you need to focus on hiring your go-to-market team, customer success team, et cetera. So you have a plan. You have essentially like a financial plan, and you have goals that come out of it. The plan can be a little wonky in the beginning because it's like you're still learning, right? And those variables that you're thinking about, like the customers you're going to get, like are they going to scale? Like am I getting more customers on like a monthly basis who are being added, more users on a monthly basis? It's a little like it's a little wonky in the beginning because you're still getting there. You're still getting your first 3 customers. You're still trying to get that product market fit, so to speak, right? But then once you get to that point, things start to smoothen out, and it becomes clear that like, okay, Now I can consistently get more customers month to month. Now I consistently have a brand. Now I consistently have more material that I can leverage to get more customers. And like the story starts to solidify, and then it becomes kind of clear, okay, now that I know I can predict this more accurately, like I need X amount of capital to hire these number of people and to scale to this point and so forth. So that's kind of how to think about it. In the earlier stages, I would say when you're starting out at the beginning, you're looking just basically get enough capital to build out your product and hire engineering team. That's kind of how we thought about it, right? Once you reach that tipping point where like that product is built, lots of customers are on it, and more can join, frequently, more are joining frequently. Now it's more about like actually thinking about where I want to get to in the next 24 months, what it's going to cost me, and then going to ask for that amount of money. So
Beautiful.
that's kind of the idea. Yep.
Beautiful. Well done. Well done. Answered very clear and concisely. I would say, now it's more so speaking on the phase that you're in. You're a little bit past this phase. I would say you've already gotten the ball rolling there. But, when you realize that you're going to be serving modular and offsite construction companies, how did you immerse yourself as a thought leader? Because you clearly are. You could speak on it. You can answer any question I could probably ask, because I'm not the most knowledgeable on it. But your clients were probably asking, why should I choose you? Why are you the go-to modular and offsite construction project management software? How did you like really just learn on the fly like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it also comes with the fact. Well, the interesting thing about modular and offsite construction, just the way the industry is now and the way it's growing, is it is a nascent industry. It's like it's at its earlier stages, but that's also very unique because of the fact that the reason it's unique is like since it's a growing early industry, there's a lot of opportunity here to learn with it, like to define it in unique ways. Like the people who are part of this trend, the new companies that are building these projects and are tackling these projects, they're learning too. Like they're not experts by any means because it's a new industry. So it's a lot of the true and tried practices are still being experimented. So that gives us a unique opportunity to say, hey, we're building a software around this industry, but we need to be flexible enough to understand that things are changing. And we need to be flexible enough to understand that like some of our customer input is going to help us, drive the roadmap in the coming years as things start to go in a certain direction or start to solidify. So we're always open to like taking customer input, and we take customer input to driving our product roadmap. So into driving the way we're building the product. And that's very important, especially if you're like in a nascent industry like this, because the goal is like you always want to be able to build the best product for the market, and the market is changing. So as people start to establish those true and tried practices, you want to feed that back into your product and make sure that other customers that are going to come your way are going to benefit from those practices too and benefit from those learnings. So in a way, becoming the community leader here is all about actually just keeping your ears open to like your large subset of customers that are feeding you information and telling you, here's how you should build this product, here's how you should build a product, and here's how the market's moving, here's why we need these things and so forth. So
you hear that? You hear that, guys? Customer discovery, user research. Yeah, just basically making your customer one of the most primary stakeholders. And it's often I've seen companies I actually really start to shift to this on my LinkedIn, is speaking with a few founders I've spoken to. Instead of them having a inter-company debate over what to build next, they're like, wait a second. Our customers can ask this. Why don't we just bring them into these meetings and say, hey, what do you want to see from this product? Like the modular and offsite construction industry is changing. I don't know enough to suggest how it's going to change, but the actual manufacturers would know. They can suggest changes to you and say, it seems like there's a shift going in this direction. How about you guys build X, Y, and Z feature set, because that will get you ahead of the curve. And people love to help. People love to see a product better serving its users' needs, because it's innovation in its truest form. And you taking the initiative to bring them into that decision will be the difference. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I believe that too, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say, what are, without saying too much, of course, what is, on the rest of the 2021 roadmap for Offsight? Like, what are your guys' goals?
I think we have a lot of interesting goals coming up for this year. One major goal is we want to expand our reach. So I think just off the bat, what does that mean? Like, it means that the offsite market and modular construction market today is actually booming, but not just in the United States. It's booming in many different geographies: U.S., Canada, UK. Many other countries have also taken active roles where the government themselves is promoting these newer methods of construction. Some people in the UK, it's even referred to as modern methods of construction.
Wow.
Essentially, the whole concept here is the government is essentially pushing these methods like Offsight, Modular, and others that are more effective, more time efficient, can deliver high quality, but also in high demand housing, affordable housing, pretty quickly, right? And I think that as you're seeing that pick up in these other markets, there's an opportunity here for a lot of different companies to benefit from our software. A lot of factories that are at the same level that are being built to kind of cater to this trend to benefit from our software. So we want to have a pretty big and expansive reach, global reach within the next 24 months. That's really our goal. So I think that's going to be on the horizon for us in the next few months.
I was going to ask you questions about that because I was watching a documentary on the early stages of the quarantine. Excuse me. And, I remember in the news when I first read about it or saw it on the news that China had built like a quarantine support center within like record time. Right. And when I watched the kind of montage of them getting in and building it, it looked kind of like what's behind you, but outdoors, of course. And I was wondering, they're probably, how long have they been using modular and offsite construction? I don't
Very
expect you
good
to have,
question. Yes. So
of course, but
yeah, absolutely. So Asia Pacific is definitely a major region for offsite and modular adoption. Like you're right, that whole hospital that was built in China and Wuhan was essentially all built offsite.
Mhm.
All those modules were built ahead of times. There were probably ICUs, patient rooms, all types of products essentially built in the factory and then kept on standby and then ready to go as soon as they had a crisis.
Mm.
And this is definitely one of the huge benefits of modular construction. It can be used not just for those temporary hospitals, but permanent ones too. You have permanent hospitals, say in the United States, two major projects, the UPenn Medical Project and the Penn State project as well, that actually have many components built prefab, built offsite. They're permanent hospitals, high quality, but all built in the factory setting, and they can get done for a fraction of the time, fraction of the cost. So it is in fact, it's in fact a global situation. And you're right, there are certain countries that are a little bit ahead of the curve, like Japan, for example, has been building modular for a while. They have more established practices in place. They have a strong supply chain, value chain built around it. So this is not like anything new to them, but they are a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of some of their learnings. And like that can essentially, obviously those learnings that they've already kind of encapsulated can also benefit a lot of these countries now that are moving in this direction. So I would still say that countries like China and others are also moving in this direction. They're not as far ahead as Japan, but they're also kind of at the forefront of this. So you definitely are seeing this as a global trend, not just in the United States, not just in Canada, UK. It's happening all across the world, even in places like Dubai, Australia, New Zealand, etc. This is becoming more and more apparent that offsite construction can solve a lot of the global construction needs and global construction woes, so to speak.
Awesome. Vikas, man. As this episode kind of comes to a close a little bit, I want to actually touch on something a little bit more personal that you could provide value to our audience in terms of your journey so far, because it is an adventure, especially what you're doing, man. It sounds like a wild, fun adventure and everything's moving quickly. And, I want you to kind of share with the audience, what is one thing you learned about yourself while being in this leadership role at a very quickly growing startup? More established business now, I would say, not just startup, right? What is one thing that you learned that kind of helped you in your operations?
That's a good question. I would say there are several things that I've learned, but I would probably say one thing that's very important is actually to be a little bit in your thinking, right? You can't be so regimental in saying that, like, this is the way it has to be, or this is the way things like based on, like, I've seen this example and it exactly has to be this way. You need to kind of have the ability to iterate, take feedback, and improve. That goes across the board, like building a better product, taking customer feedback and building a better product, focusing on figuring out what part of the market to focus on, figuring out who are the original customers, and then leveraging those original customers to get others. Like that all essentially builds around iterating, like learning and iterating. You're always learning. Like there should never be a time when you're not learning. So I think that's also a crucial element that I would say personally I learned from this whole process, and I continue to pick up from this process. Some of the learning can happen just from reading, but a lot of learning can also happen from asking people questions. So other people who've done it before you, other people who are in the industry, other people who are startup founders too in the similar enterprise software space could give you some feedback there. So it's good to just basically take learnings, feed that back into your business, feed that back into what you're doing, and then iterate. And I think that's just, that has been a very important skill set, and a personal type of skill set that I've picked up through the process. And I hope that benefits me even now going forward in the next 2 years. So
It's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a beautiful lesson, man. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to pick your brain and get you to, just basically share your story as well, because it's incredible, man. You're really positioned perfectly, and you're staying on top of the markets, making sure you're better serving your customers' needs every day. So thank you for joining.
thanks a lot, Ethan. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and before you go, actually tell the audience how they can get in touch with you.
So if you want to get in touch with me, there are several means, but I would say just, honestly, you can go direct. You can email me at vikas.murali. So it's vikas.murali at offsight.com. And that's spelled OFFSIGHT.com. So feel free to email me direct if you have any questions, if I can help out. I'd love to hear from everyone. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too.